Everyone ready?
Go.
So I'm going to try to tie together two elements that I think was important from what we've already seen. The one is this idea of thinking about 2025 as represented by one word, and the idea of fuel and friction, and how do they tie together that can generate innovation breakthroughs for you. So when I looked at your list of all the one words that you gave, they basically fitted into two categories. The one was a solution to a problem, right? So organization, structure, intention, etc. These are all solutions to problems. The other type of work is they represented some unmet need, some positive effect that you want that you don't have at the moment, right? So think about, you have a problem. I don't know if can everybody read this? Or is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have a problem. You have a solution for that problem. And you are looking at some future positive effect, right? So your one word could be the solution. It could be the positive effect that you're looking for. Why hasn't this happened before? Is that there is status quo. And the status quo is in direct conflict with the solution that you're trying to implement. Right. I'll use KB's example that he shared yesterday, just an example of what fits into these boxes, right? So this represents some kind of change that I need to make. And this represents the not change, no change. Why has the status quo survived? Because there's some current positive that I get from it.
From what?
A current positive, right?
Wow.
This solution not only has an upside, this is representing my upsides, right? But it has a downside, right? So there's a future negative of putting a solution. That represents typically the effort it will take, the cost it will take, the risks I will have to incur, etc. But there's also a current negative of the status quo, which is putting pressure on me, right, to make a change. Everybody follow so far? So if you just graphically map out this for yourself, what you can do here is you can read off directly whether there's enough fuel and not too much friction. So let me show you where it is. This component over here, these two, is the fuel. This is the reason for the change, right? You're either trying to get rid of this negative that you're currently experiencing, or you're trying to gain this positive. Both of those give you fuel for the change, right? And guess where the friction is? Friction, right? What can block you from making this change is the fear of having to give up something that's associated with the status quo, or the fear of having to gain something you don't want. So the little story that we tell to explain this diagram is, imagine you're standing at the bottom of a mountain, right? And you have to make a decision whether you're going to climb this mountain or not. What will give you the fuel, right? To climb, not just climb up that mountain, but run up that mountain, right? Is there's an alligator at the bottom of the mountain at the lake that's biting your ass, right? And it's getting closer and closer and closer. That represents the current negatives that I'm trying to get away from, right? What represents the future positive is the pot of gold at the top of the mountain. Those two things, the bigger the alligator, the bigger the pot of gold, the more fuel it gives me, right? What represents the friction part is that there's something at the base of the mountain which represents my comforts. that I have to leave behind. And I don't want to. So in our storyline, when we teach this to kids, that is represented by a mermaid that I've become friends with at the bottom of the mountain of the lake, right?
Alan has a great book about it.
Yeah. The future negative, right, of thinking about climbing up that mountain is all the effort, all the cost, all the risk. And that's represented by two crutches, one representing all the effort, like climbing up, and the other one, all the risks. The mistake that we make, which is probably the mistake that all of us make here, is we tend to, even though conceptually I hope that this model is useful, so it gives you a great framework to think about all of these things together, right? Is that we think through our eyes. What we need to do is to think through the eyes of all the stakeholders, including your own team. So when you're presenting a change to your organization, right, what is it that you need from them? When we say, do you understand and agree? That's the worst question that you could ask, because the answer will be, because of the power balance, is yes. We understand and agree. You want to ask them, what do you understand? I need from you, you explain the problem, you explain what you're thinking about a solution, you explain how that's in direct conflict with what we're doing currently, right? It clashes with the cultures, like you mentioned, right? There's a culture that we want to create, there's a culture that exists, there's some kind of conflict. Each one of these have upsides and downsides. You need their help to find out what's in the boxes, not just from your perspective, but from their perspective, the customer's perspective, your supplier's perspective. Does it make sense so far? Problem solving is finding a solution to a problem. There's a higher level to problem solving, which is innovation. Innovation is finding a solution to a problem without trade-offs, without having to give up something that I don't want, without gaining something I don't want. So true innovation is this. So drawn like this, this is innovation. And an innovation, the criteria is, I get all the future positive that I want. I don't have to give up any of the current positives. So tick box. And at the same time, I don't have to live with any of the future negatives or the current negatives. Those are my 4 criteria for an innovation. And the more you can get help, not just from your perspective to fill in these boxes, but from your team, from your customers, from your suppliers, anybody that's a key stakeholder that you need either their contribution or buy-in from, the more likely you are to come up with true innovations. Does it make sense so far?
Yeah.
So getting back to, the other thing I just wanted to, in the last minute, cover is the idea of personal versus business goals. Any of you have heard of Martin Seligman, Dr. Martin Seligman? He's the father of positive psychology, right? And he came up with this beautiful acronym called PERMA. Stands for P-E-R-M-A-H. PERMA. He basically said is if you think about your goal, your personal goal, it's well-being, it's a sense of meaning and purpose. But those are things you can't measure directly, right? What are the elements of that? The necessary conditions, the things that you need enough of to lead a full and meaningful life. And it's represented by these 6 elements. And I'll put together a slide and I'll email everybody so you don't have to take notes right now. The P is for the amount of positive emotions that you experience in your life. Drinking good wine, having great sex, all the positive emotions, right? E is for the level of engagement that you have when you're doing the work. That engagement is flow. How often are you in a flow state of mind where you lose track of time, right? How often does it happen? The R is for relationships, connection. How much of that do you have? The M is for doing stuff that gives you meaning. The A is for experiencing a sense of achievement. It's like why we have hobbies, right? Play golf, and it's just a sense of achievement. It's not meaningful, it's not. And the A is health. So when any of these drop below a level of good enough, I don't have enough of it. That's the problem. Does it make sense?
Oh.
That's what triggers a need for a change, is some unmet need. And it's none of these things is the goal, right? I'm not trying to maximize my positive emotions or engagement. I'm just trying to have enough of it. In the same way that in a business, there are certain necessary conditions that you have to have. I came up with a little acronym while I was waiting for us this morning. So the PERMA one is a nice acronym. For business side, this is essentially the demand side, right, can be represented by a need. I need enough demand for my product or service to hit my goal, business goal. Do you agree?
Yes.
If I don't have enough demand, that's my constraint, right? That's where the constraint part comes in, right? I need enough ability that's made up of capacity and capability to reliably meet that demand. And again, that could be at a level of not enough. I don't have enough capacity or capability to fully meet the demand. Does that make sense so far? I need enough supply, external resources, right? My suppliers, the stuff that they provide me. I need enough cash, liquidity, right? I don't want too much exposure, risks, and the last part is management attention. That's the equivalent of the PERMA for a business. What do I need enough of to keep on making more and more money or create more and more value for my stakeholders? Whenever one of these drop below the level of good enough, that's a problem, right? Then you think about what solves this problem. What's the solution to this problem? How is that in conflict with my status quo? And then to fill in all the boxes. What will be the unique positives I get from the solution? But what are the unique negatives? What's unique positives I don't want to give up that I get from my current situation versus what's the unique negatives of it? So I'll take in the last minute just an example from KB, right? When we started working together, problem is that cash flow is low, right? It's like a key requirement for running that business. Problem is cash flow. What's the solution? Is to reduce inventories. Does it make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Right? What will be the future positive if I'm able to do that? Is I'll increase my cash flow. I'll have it back to the level of good enough. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
But there's a major downside. What's a major downside of reducing inventories? I'm starting to run out of stock. I'm starting to lose sales. Agree?
Yeah.
What's the current status quo is not to reduce inventories, to keep what I have. And that means the amount of quantity I keep per SKU, but also the number of SKUs. Remember, he said 4,000 SKUs, right? Mm-hmm. What is the positive of having that? Why did he have that? Why did he grow to 4,000 SKUs and keeping, 1 or 2 or 3 months of stock of everything? Is to always have availability. When a customer walks in,
Mm-hmm.
is to have what they want, right? And over time, every time somebody says, well, do you carry this? No, but we can. Let me add that in, right?
Mm-hmm.
We used to carry 10 and we just run out, we need 12. So you constantly are growing inventories and SKUs to ensure high availability. But it comes with a massive downside, which is the cost of complexity, right? Draining your attention, there's always 80-20. So what is a true innovation? Something that gives me all the positives, gives me high levels of cash flow, very high levels of availability, not just at an individual SKU, but being able to carry multiple SKUs without the downside of all the cost of managing that stuff, right? Is the innovation we came up with is order smaller quantities more frequently. Ticks off, gets me all the pros, none of the cons. Right, so that would be my advice to you, is go and take that one word that you've come up with, right? Go and put it here. It's either a solution or it's a positive effect that you want because of some unmet need. Something has dropped below the level of enough, right? It's putting pressure on you. And go and fill in the diagram, share it with your team, see what did you miss, because we all have blind spots and biases. And one way of picking it up is if you have a list of 20 positives here and no negatives, or one negative, you're probably biased, right? That's what your mind has been focused on. Same thing here, right? But that's the idea, is how can we increase the fuel and how can we reduce the friction? That's the way to make that one thing reality. As long as there's not enough fuel, either for you or for any stakeholders who help you need, it won't happen. If that pot of gold is not big enough, if that alligator is not big enough, there's not going to be enough fuel. But if there's too much friction, if you're asking people to have to give up too much, leave those comforts behind, leave the mermaid behind, or there's too much risk in terms of effort, cost, etc., it will never happen. So I hope that was useful. That's it.
Thank you so much.
All right, so I thought that actually was a great way to tie this together. I want to make two comments. You said it, but you didn't write it. And I just want to make sure you realize this, is that the number one, what he said is that because you think these things doesn't mean everyone else thinks these things. This is what he said earlier, is that you may not see any downside to the current system, but I get to work with my best friend. Again, we have to overcome these. But the second thing is that he implied is that I don't have to care about these if I can mitigate them. If I can do something that trades them for a current plus that gives them something else, I don't have to actually solve for getting them exactly what they want.
Yeah.
Right?
Just a quick example. Think about quitting a bad habit, right? It's like the solution is stop. Stop smoking, stop drinking, stop using drugs. What's the status quo is keep on doing that. Why is it that we struggle so much? Is it really because we don't see the positive of quitting or the negative of we don't? No. It's often not ignorance. It's inertia. And inertia is caused by fear of giving up something that I associate with this. What do you think is the positive for people that have addictions? It helps them to cope with stress, or they fool themselves that it helps them to cope with stress, right? It's better than killing myself, so...
But it's self-medication.
It's self-medication, right?
Right.
Yeah. So if the positive that I don't want to give up is some way to cope with stress or with a life that sucks, right? What's the negative of stopping tomorrow? Is a fear of all the effort it will take, the risk it will take, what if I fail, right? So an innovation is that I'm going to stop, but I have to add something so I don't have to give up a way of coping with stress, maybe start meditating, exercising, etc. Right. And I have to add something that allows me to reduce dramatically the effort or the cost of quitting the habit, appoint a personal trainer, do something like that. So that's the basic idea. It's like another example, quick example is we were finding people struggling to get buy-in for the implementation of a new IT system. Right. And the biggest resistance came from the IT department. I was driving a CEO mad. He says, I'm giving you a new toy. Why are you resisting it? What Blair was saying is they had tied their identity and value to the old legacy system, right? That's what gave them value. They were only people in the company that knew how that bloody legacy system operated. Suddenly you implement SAP, what's their value? Zero.
And it may seem stupid to you.
Yeah.
Right, that they want to stick with, but this is the human component.
And it's basically asking them to fill in, what are you scared that you'd have to give up? Well, we don't have any value. No, you thought that all your value is from running the legacy system. It's actually understanding the business, right? And SAP you're going to be putting on your bio, etc., etc. So it's getting other people involved and figuring out what are people scared of. Sometimes it's you don't have enough fuel. Right? There's not enough motivation, incentive. What's in it for me? What will make this worth your while? but often it's this part, is there's just too much friction. I have to give up too much or gain too much.
Yeah, and again, this is a much simpler way of looking at something that's extremely complex, but this is Keiretsu. This is what the Japanese would do. This is why they put little teams together and said, it's not just you, it's everybody else is going to be impacted by it. This is why they went in and said, oh, you got to do this. And at Keiretsu system, we took the tour, I don't know, people took the tour of the barrel factory, right? Where they're really trying to bring things down like $1 at a time. They really, really need little things and they need buy-in. This is but this is, to me, a much simpler way of looking at it. Now, if you want to be trained in Keiretsu, and you can do it, and it's a lifestyle and it's culture, but what I would say, the only thing that you have to be careful of in this is that what the Keiretsu system does is it makes you, socializes you to think a different way about you and others. Because when I see this, I go, oh, intellectually, I love this. Let me put a thing there. Let me fix this. But I have to remind myself that this is nothing without me doing the same thing with everybody else.
Absolutely.
And having that feeling. And by the way, there will be a point when there are certain people on the team that you get rid of. Because their current positives are so high that they will sabotage this no matter what happens. And at that point, you have to make a decision where you jump back out and say, I get it, I love them, but they're not going to be. And I've had this situation before where they were not going to be okay. It doesn't matter what we did, because for them, this current was never going to be enough. And that may be because they were head of IT because they knew how to do COBOL. Yeah. And they're not going to be head of IT, or their job's at risk now. And that you'll never overcome that with people. So look at this as a great way to ask yourself, and then take what you put down and try to figure out who else is having a problem with it. But I love the model. So if a slide would be,
I'll share that, absolutely.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
All right, so we have one more thing to do before we go to, we're going to have you guys do your 3 things. So Phil's going to come up, and just like Dr. Barnard said, let's take what you guys have all said. One of the other things that you guys have done here today is you've actually listened to other people. You've shared your problems, and you've got